Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Real National Dialogue with myself, Jonathan Mokes, and Paul Berkowitz. Paul, how are you doing today?
Jonathan, I'm doing really well. I hope you are too. It's a lovely warm winter's day in Joburg again, caught in between two cold fronts. I don't know. It's always sunny when I speak to you.
Well, hopefully that's symbolic of the rays of insight from our discussions, we hope. So, as ever, a lot to discuss. We thought that we'd sort of touch succinctly on a few topics today. So we're going to do a little bit of a wrap-up conversation on the appropriations bill and the state of the GNU. Look at the by-elections that took place last week, Wednesday. There were four of them, and pretty interesting results. It will be important to talk about the looming tariffs coming into effect on Friday, the 1st of August, which is this Friday. We thought we'd also have a look, Paul, at two political parties. So Action SA have introduced a very interesting private members bill, which I think warrants quite a bit of discussion. And then the EFF held their 12th birthday bash in Khayelitsha last Saturday. So good just to chat about that. And then it wouldn't be the Real National Dialogue without us ending on a state of play in Johannesburg. So quite a bit to get through to it. So let's dig straight in. I mean, I realize there's a lot we are not talking about, but there's also a lot that people tend to forget about. And what was top of everybody's minds this time last week, so today being Wednesday when we were recording, and last week Wednesday was, of course, the appropriations bill. And at the beginning of last week, and we discussed it when we last spoke, Paul, was the fear that the DA was not going to support the budget votes for the Department of Higher Education and Human Settlements as a result of the fallout that had been precipitated by the firing of Andrew Whitfield. The fact that, or the possibility, should I say, that the DA would not have voted for those budget votes may have collapsed the appropriations bill and collapsed Budget 3.0, and possibly would also have meant the end of the Government of National Unity in its current form. As I think everybody knows, that did not happen. We discussed last week that Ramaphosa had fired Nkabane, the then Minister of Higher Education, and that managed to get the DA over the line to the extent where the appropriations bill did pass. It met the deadline, which is tomorrow, Thursday, the 31st of July, for the budget to take effect, and the Government of National Unity lives to fight another day. What are your thoughts, Paul, on well, basically on the whole saga of the budget, but I think more importantly, what now lies ahead for the government?
A couple of quick points, Jonathan. Firstly, if sharp-eyed viewers will remember that last week we debated whether the DA would vote for these bills, and you called it, and I was on the fence. So I think we follow your conclusions in future. No pressure.
Not always.
While still making the odd side bet. I think we agreed that maintaining the status quo was most likely, at least in the short term. And as you said, big crisis averted, and indefinitely for the foreseeable future until the next crisis or altercation, it should hold in its current form, Jonathan. But I think, and we'll talk about this later in the recording, the issue of there being bigger external challenges, tariffs, trade and jobs and money to be lost, the prominent role, for example, of John Steenhuisen as Minister of Agriculture, working in a very critical role here with the president and all of his men and women. Yeah, status quo to hold for now.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be the case. We also know, and we discussed this last, I think a couple of weeks ago now, that the NEC of the ANC was postponed. It seems that for the time being, the DA is not going to leave the GNU. It still feels that it is very well placed in the GNU from a political influence point of view, and that it believes it's doing well as an opposition within government, but at the same time being able to trumpet what it can achieve in the portfolios it controls. Cyril Ramaphosa does not want to collapse the GNU at this stage, ahead of the G20, ahead of some difficult, as you say, external headwinds. But as I pointed out in a piece that we released on the South Africa Brief on Friday, I do think that potentially all bets are off when we head into early next year, when the sort of cycle starts again, and we have a budget following a State of the Nation. And then we're also heading into a local government election. And I think the DA and the ANC are going to have some very different or slightly different calculations to make. So, yeah, crisis averted. That's not to say something will not emerge, knowing South Africa in the next week or two. So, and we'll probably be back before long to discuss the options and the scenarios that follow. I think what is interesting, though, given the looking into the local government elections, are the trends that are starting to emerge in by-elections. And uh, people often accuse me and others of being too obsessed by elections and the data contained therein, but they are, together with polling that gets released on a all too rare occasion, they are the best barometer of where parties are placed, the efficacy of their operations, and where provinces and particular geographies are moving in terms of their vote. And we had four very, very interesting by-elections last week, Paul.
We did, Jonathan. But firstly, don't apologize for being obsessed with by-elections and by-election results, because you're speaking to the wrong person. Unless we start to boast, but we don't have to do that. Yeah, as you said, four very interesting by-elections, Jonathan, all very close, all ending up with an increased fracturing of the vote. In fact, I think what was interesting is there was no winning candidate that achieved a majority in any four of those in any of those four wards. One surprising result, or two surprising results. There were two clashes between the DA and the PA in the Western Cape. One that seemed a bit more risky for the DA than the other. In the end, the safer seat, or the seat we thought was safer, was the one that fell to the Patriotic Alliance. So let's go into them, starting with those in Ward 27 in Drakenstein. Now, Drakenstein is an important municipality. As you know, Jonathan, is the second biggest in the Western Cape after Cape Town. It's one where the DA has, even after the loss of this ward last week, where it has a majority, but that majority is getting whittled quite thin. So in that ward, the PA grew from 1% to 43%. Again, a plurality, not a majority. The DA dropped from 58% to 39%. An incredibly close battle, 4 percentage points separating the two. And if this is a sign of things to come, Jonathan, we are going to talk a bit more about the PA in a second. If this is a sign to come in the bigger municipalities in the Western Cape, then the DA has got a real fight on its hands next year to maintain majorities in municipalities where it had always felt safe. Okay. In Bergrivier, the DA defended Ward 6, and it actually increased its share of the vote from 40 to 45%. Again, not a majority. PA came in at 39%. Again, just 6 percentage points separating the two parties. Could have gone either way. In Solplaatje, this was an interesting one. That's Kimberley in the Northern Cape. The PA was defending a ward that it had won from the ANC in a by-election in 2023. And the ward returned to the ANC. The PA lost it. The PA here dropped to 39%, and the ANC grew to 43%. You see, again, not a majority. All of these contests very close. The last by-election, Jonathan, was in Sebokeng in Emfuleni, just south of Joburg, Ward 35. The ANC defended its seat, but dropped from 54% to 38%. You remember me wishing ill on the party in the seat last week. And again, maintaining the seat with an even smaller plurality. Very close, lots of uncertainty, contests that could go either way. And for regular readers of our Substack, Jonathan, I'm taking this 3 week break between last week's election and the ones next week to do some deep research into the PA's performance in the Western Cape since the 2021 local government election. So look out for that.
No, thanks, Paul. And thanks for the readout on the by-elections. It's going to be very exciting to read your analysis and piece. I think obviously what stands out is the PA in the Western Cape. So a big blip on their recent by-election momentum would have been the result in Sol Plaatje, which they would not have been happy with. I did speak a little bit last week about their operational capacity of being able to handle multiple by-elections at the same time. And I suspect that even though they were defending Sol Plaatje, they would have wanted to have really put a big effort in the Western Cape against the DA. So it would be interesting to know. I don't know at this point in time to what extent they had enough resources in Sol Plaatje to ward off the ANC. That being said, their performance in the Western Cape, in both Drakenstein and Bergrivier, I mean, Drakenstein is significant because I think they went up from 1% to 43%, which is an incredible surge. But they did both did well in both wards. And that goes on top of an incredible surge that they had in the northern areas of PE a week or so beforehand. What is also notable for me is MK's performance in Sebokeng. So the ANC, as you say, held on to the ward, but I mean MK getting 21% from a zero base outside of KZN again is a solid result. What's worrying for the EFF is their drop from about 20 into the single digits. We'll talk more about them later, but we've been repeatedly talking about two distinct trends on by-elections over the past couple of months. The one is the PA and their growth and their momentum, particularly in the Western Cape. The second is MK and its ability to record some not like wildly impressive, but some decent, solid results outside of KZN, which completely flies in the face of the internal strife that they're having as a party.
Yes. And if you also read some of the background work, not just with the MK, but the PA as well, it's not always smooth sailing. For example, there was an accusation by the DA candidate, I think in Drakenstein, that the PA candidate had attempted to bribe him. And the reason that the Sol Plaatje by-election, the ward went to by-election for a second time, is because the previous councillor, the PA councillor, was fired by the party. So there's things happening, there's this internal chaos, and yet the results are still coming. And just to give a brief overview, Jonathan, of the PA in the Western Cape, in the 2021 election, in the local government election, overall, the PA only got less than 2.5% of the vote overall in the province. But by last year's election, in terms of the provincial vote, they'd gone up to 7.5%. So they've grown 5 percentage points. A lot of the growth we'll be seeing from the by-elections that had happened at the election. Could we see it leading up over 22, 23? And we'll tease that out. But growing at a tear. And as you said, MK in Sebokeng bringing the ANC down well below 50% in that ward. In a municipality where they're hovering around the 50% mark, DA and the ANC have got to be really scared for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point when you led us into these by-election results, the fragmentation, the fact that no party in those 4 wards got above 50% is significant. I think in Sebokeng, there were about 10 parties contesting, and I think what we're seeing is a coalition derby, so to speak, in the municipal election next year, which is going to put a lot of pressure in a different way on the GNU, because different coalition configurations, but it's also going to lead to some increasing instability in local government, sadly, after next year's local election.
Yeah, and we will have to have some serious conversations, Jonathan, on how do we knit together these fragmented bits and these different parties. And I think that important work should happen before the election. And
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about frameworks and rules and transparency, and I think we'll be talking a lot more about that. One
Yeah.
last point on
Yeah.
these by-elections, Jonathan, which speaks to your discussion around resources and smaller parties. It's interesting that Good chose not to contest either of the Western Cape elections last week. It's not clear if that was a resources issue or some kind of pre-by-election agreement, maybe with the PA or the ANC, not to fragment the opposition vote. And we've seen that before. But hey, it might be easy to say I won't contest if I had no intention or resources anyway. We'll
Yeah.
keep an eye on these kinds of things.
Absolutely, very similar to Action SA in Tshwane recently, where it hasn't been contesting by-elections in the municipality it holds the mayorship in.
Yeah.
So let's move away, sadly, from by-elections, but go to something that I think is very worrying for a lot of us, and that is the impending Trump tariffs that are coming into effect on this Friday, Friday the 1st of August. And it seems at the time we record, and obviously we are always subject to being corrected by the news events, but at the time of recording, it looks like the Trump tariffs of 30% are going to kick in on Friday the 1st of August on goods being exported to the US. The Trade and Industry Ministry indicated on Tuesday, yesterday, that it's still waiting for substantive feedback, in its words, from the trade deal that it had proposed to the US. They did indicate last week that something called a condition precedent document had been signed, but that really sort of details the kind of steps that parties need to take for a trade deal to come into existence. And trade deals are, as we've discussed before, Paul, very difficult and lengthy things to discuss. What was quite notable is that the Director General of DIRCO, International Relations and Cooperation, sort of alluded, I think it was at a Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation event, that discussions are taking place, that there is a non-disclosure agreement in place with the US so that not much can be reported out, but that apparently Black economic empowerment is a big sticking point for the US and is very much blocking any progress in respect to the trade deal. We know that is one of the policies that the Trump administration has been fixated on, together with expropriation. But I think there are very, very anxious moments now for particularly the automotive industry, the citrus industry. The Mercedes-Benz factory in East London, apparently there have been talks inside the company and with its headquarters in Stuttgart, Germany, that because of the tariffs, it may actually have to relocate away from East London, because I think 90% of the vehicles that it makes at that factory are exported to the US. And then the citrus sector, I think, has a more immediate worry, because there was an article published, I think it was in Business Day earlier this week, which indicates that the Citrus Growers Association were indicating that there's cartons and cartons and cartons of pre-packed fruit ready to go to the US, but the instant that the tariffs are applied, they won't get buyers. The fruit's going to go to waste. And the ultimate result is that this is going to potentially be a jobs bloodbath in particular parts of the country, the Eastern Cape, rural Northern Cape, rural Western Cape, which we can ill afford.
We can't, Jonathan. I think I read the same article. where the industry was talking about the potential, obviously well before the tariffs were put in place, of growing jobs in the industry in the future by 100,000. Now we are talking about losing tens of thousands of jobs. It is a bloodbath. Um, I'd like to quickly go through. You've summarized nicely what we know about the proposal, and just how, to my mind, not an expert, have studied trade economics at university, but not a specialist. How this proposed deal has got all the elements, and mostly bad, of trade deals between a more powerful country, the US, and us. And we've seen it before, um, 20 years ago with the European Union, with the wine and spirits deal, which we won't get into now. So let's talk about it. BEE as a sticking point, I'm not sure personally, Jonathan, if it is more of a tactic to extract more from the negotiations than a real sticking point. Many countries have got um, ownership rules, and naturalization rules, and um, I'm not sure that it is as much of a deal breaker as the US would let on, but I'm not inside these talks. Here's the proposals, and here's my immediate thoughts. One of the proposals is that we import a lot of liquefied natural gas from the US over 10 years. This is proposed to be worth 12 billion US dollars. But we have natural gas, and we've been looking at pipelines right next door with Mozambique for a long time. Right next door makes sense when transporting. Um, Market access for US poultry exports that would unlock 91 million in trade. 91 million, not a lot. A drop in the ocean compared to the 12 billion. A drop in the ocean compared to the idea that we'll invest 3.3 billion in US industries. I'll get to that in a second. This is an example of special interest, Jonathan. The US poultry industry has been wanting to export to South Africa for a long time. We've been resisting for a long time. It's 91 million against multiple billions. Okay. South African firms to invest $3.3 billion in US industries such as mining and metals recycling, while both governments agree to pursue joint investment in critical minerals, pharmaceuticals, and agri-machinery. Notice the hard numbers when it comes to commitments expected from South Africa, but the vague general idea with no numbers to invest in critical minerals, pharmaceuticals, and agri-machinery. Now, I'm assuming investing in US industries such as mining and metals recycling, a lot of the metals recycling could potentially be platinum group metals from the catalytic converters we export. So what we are looking at here is potentially moving the beneficiation and downstream benefits to the US. We've talked before, I've written before on the Substack about how we seem trapped after decades in the very basic parts of manufacturing, the minerals and energy, and then the base metals from there. And all of the and the lion's share of the diversification and the value add under the motor industry development programs, mostly in catalytic converters. So these are my thoughts. I think it is a slanted deal against us, and that is the reality of the world. A lot of other countries, small countries, smaller than us, are facing the same issues and the same bullying tactics from the US.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I think that's an important point to emphasize. I think only at the time of recording, about 5 countries have actually negotiated trade deals with the US before the 1st of August deadline, and on terms that are quite punitive. I think the European Union, for example, has escaped with 15% tariffs, which are pretty damaging. It's not a great trade deal for them, and we're in the sort of similar situation, and it is a sort of tactic to sort of pressure countries such as South Africa into sort of making deals quickly that aren't as bad as 30%, but are significantly worse than what we started the year with.
Yeah.
Again, I have to say, and I've said this before, that I do think the government has been, despite the bullying of the US and the decks that are stacked against it, we remain and have been incredibly flat-footed. I still think it beggars belief that we have not got a ambassador appointed to have replaced Ibrahim Rasool. It's been months. We don't seem to have a proper offensive game going on in Washington. And again, I know there's all sorts of headwinds applying there against South Africa, and it's a very, very difficult environment. The special envoy has not been particularly evident in the US, unless, and I don't want to be unfair because I don't know what's going on. I'm not involved in the talks, and I don't know, but I'm not seeing anything, and that again really points to a critique that we have generally of the government is, where is the communication? We're getting information from the spokesperson of trade, industry, and competition, but in a situation such as what we're facing, where hundreds of thousands of jobs are potentially at stake here, where are senior ministers? Where is the president? In fact, the president on Friday, um, and again reportedly, is going to be in Guinea-Bissau on the day that the tariffs apply. And I think, as someone has written, our sort of trade with Guinea-Bissau sort of amounts to about 12 million rand, as opposed to the billions that we work on with the US. And I think South Africans understand the difficulties that we are facing in negotiating with a bully such as the US, and also with people that are relying on misinformation, disinformation, but what South Africans deserve is proper communication and a proper vision as to how we are going to diversify, seek other deals, and seek other ways to be able to shore up these industries which are going to be sorely affected. Maybe that's coming. Maybe I'm proved completely wrong, and I'm going to be more than delighted to eat my words next week if we see the president and Parks Towel and John Steenhuisen come out with some very clear communication on what we're going to do to mitigate the effects. But sadly, I think it seems that we're just going to be carrying on muddling along, and ultimately people are going to be suffering because I'm not seeing the government take the lead here.
I agree with you, Jonathan. And we do deserve better. I agree with that as well. We do deserve better as the public. We do deserve a government that can do joined up thinking and that is proactive. My worry, and the elephant in the room, is that I think a lot of the problems that we have in Washington come from the decision by South Africa to take Israel to the
Yes.
ICJ. I don't think there's getting around it. That case and the support for that case has picked up an incredible amount of momentum in the last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
with other countries, big countries, Brazil, signing and joining the matter. And my worry, Jonathan, is against that backdrop that the government's just given up, that they might
Mm.
be going through the motions, that um, the that they don't think there's any way of resetting that relationship until the matter with Israel is resolved.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout, Paul. We've mentioned before how, it's very soon after meetings with Netanyahu that Donald Trump has sort of posted things about South Africa. It's also quite clear a lot of the efforts in Congress aimed at South Africa result from the anger at our alignment or perceived alignment with Iran, and then that feeds into the International Court of Justice case. And yes, the momentum has stepped up in the past 2 weeks. You've also got big European countries such as the UK and France indicating that they're going to recognize the state of Palestine, unless Israel sort of changes its approach in respect of aid going into Gaza. And against this backdrop, South African government, to be fair, is in a difficult position. But yes, I mean, things move
But
very, very fast. Yeah.
we still deserve a proper effort.
Yeah, no, we still deserve a proper
We
effort.
can't
And
accept that the government has given up.
Yeah. No, we can't. And we need a proper communication and proper empathy with the communities that are affected, because there are going to be some very, very worried families, let
Yeah.
alone businesses, very worried families in Nelson Mandela Metro, in Buffalo City, in the Northern Cape, in the Western Cape. The impacts of this are severe at a time where, the the employment statistics and the economy can't bear sort of further hardship. So let's see what transpires and what the result is on tariff day, and I'm sure we'll revisit this next week. Moving to a different topic, and maybe getting into our focus on two political party activities. So I was very intrigued actually by a proposal from Action SA that has cropped up over the past week, and this may have been in response to the saga of deputy ministers and the placing of Senzo Mqunu on special leave. I'm not sure, but Action SA has tabled a bill that is making a series of proposals to change the constitution to abolish deputy ministers in their entirety, to mandate parliamentary vetting of ministers. So basically, what that would do is the president would no longer be able to hire or appoint cabinet ministers at will. He could nominate a cabinet minister, but then Parliament would have to confirm the appointment of the minister. So that's very akin to what you find in the US, where the Senate needs to confirm cabinet picks from a president. That Action SA has also proposed the giving the ability of Parliament to remove ministers via a motion of no confidence, and then also expanding, interestingly, the number of ministers that a president can appoint or nominate in their construct from outside Parliament from two to four. So some interesting ideas. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, from easiest to hardest, Jonathan, some of them to me seem no-brainers. Abolish deputy ministers? Yes. Save the money. What do they do? I think you told me, if I'm not mistaken, that if the minister is removed or the minister can't do something or the minister's unavailable, the deputy minister is not legally able to assume executive authority.
Executive, yeah.
So, I mean, what is the point? What are they good for? No offense to anyone who is a deputy minister. I'm saying the position. Okay, I would support that. And I just want to say before I continue, Jonathan, that this is in line with Action SA's position as the leader of the opposition of outside the opposition. They've been running for since 2024 on a clean government and a clean governance and a cutting the waste and a cutting the fat in government.
Mm.
They've got their GNU dashboard where they are monitoring what is going on. So in that respect, Action SA and the EFF are doing proper opposition work, even though the coalitions are slightly different. Mandate parliamentary vetting confirmation hearings. Um, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. But I'd like to bring up that removing ministers via motions and no confidence. Gareth van Onselen tweeted that, in his opinion, this is a violation of the separation of powers, that you're confusing the executive with the legislature. And I don't know, I'm not a legal scholar, so I don't know if this passes muster. I think it would be difficult to think that you can be removed from your job um, by your peers, and I guess you're nominated by your peers as well. And I can see the potential for conflict of interest. Expanding the number of ministers outside of Parliament from two to four, I don't have a strong opinion on that. I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad idea. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, pretty aligned to yours, Paul. I mean, I think I'll be digging a bit deeper into this with a view to writing a piece and sort of setting out some thoughts in more detail on this. But in short, would agree with the removal of deputy ministers. I don't see the value add that they offer. They can't they're not part of cabinet. We've seen the folly of deputy ministers with the recent situation in the police ministry. So there are two deputy ministers to Senzo Mchunu. He was removed. Neither of them were promoted or able to be put into his position. And in fact, Gwedi Mantashe has to act as a police minister until Faraz Kachalia can come in as the acting police minister going forward. So it creates a bloated executive. It would save some money. I mean, it's probably a small bit of money in the scheme of billions, but it's something.
But
And yeah.
sorry to interrupt, because again, but surely it should free up a deputy minister to do some proper parliamentary work then.
Well, exactly. Yes, yes, absolutely. And enable and strengthen, to the point about separation of powers, strengthen, because I think you make the good point. I mean, I don't know how many ministries are there now in South Africa. I lose count, but let's say it's in the 30s.
Yeah.
You've got at least another 30 people that are taken out of their parliamentary work.
No, it's
But
more, Jonathan. I
is it
think the
more?
figures are something like 32 ministers, but 47 deputies, because some departments are lucky enough to get two
Of
deputies,
course, like the police ministry. Yes. So
like the police
so that's
ministry.
a
So
that's a lot
40,
of people.
47 is you've got 11, 12% back to do some work.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, so let's say deputy ministers. I must say I quite like the parliamentary confirmation of ministerial appointments. I think it works quite well in the jurisdictions that do it. So it still gives the ability and the right to the president to nominate who he wants. And if a nomination does not succeed, for him then to look at alternatives. But I think it's good for Parliament to scrutinize the nature of the appointments. I think I said to you, chatting informally the other day, Chief Justice Zondo, I think was quoted in a story of saying it pained him to have to swear in ministers that had been implicated in the Zondo Commission. Now, if a parliamentary confirm, and especially in the Parliament as we currently have it, where there's no supermajority, ministers who have a difficult past in terms of their track record would get grilled and may not pass muster to be able to serve on the executive, and that's a good thing. I think that's probably the separation of powers working. Motions of no confidence. I think Gareth's point is interesting, and again, like you, I'm not a legal scholar. I think it though would probably create too much instability again, probably in a construct where you've got a minority government, and you could be paralyzing the work of Parliament on a daily basis with numerous motions of no confidence. I mean, I think there are removal mechanisms, and maybe there's impeachment. And again, I'm not sure of all the provisions that do exist. You probably find that there are mechanisms to remove ministers. I'm pretty agnostic on the increase from 2 to 4 non-executive, or non-members of Parliament. Again, one would hope that you don't have to increase the cost to the fiscus of bringing in extra people. You would think that the members of Parliament elected, are able to do the job, but there are some circumstances where you need proper expertise in there. So maybe I think I need to think and reflect on that a bit more. But by and large, I think the deputy ministers and the parliamentary confirmation are good ideas, I think.
I agree. So you've convinced me on the parliamentary vetting. I like that idea, Jonathan. I do see it as checks and balances. But while we are talking about the pros and the cons, on the con side, and specifically with motions and no confidence, the last thing I'd want to see is Parliament descend into what's happened in the metros
Yeah.
for the last 4 years, where it's weaponized, where there's horse trading, where positions are based on horse trading and coalition politics. Yes, but vetting beforehand, as long as worst case scenario, you have a freshly minted minister, and then their scandal comes out, and it's harder to get rid of them. But again, my old war horse, my old hobby horse, Jonathan, if there are clear rules, if there's transparency, and if the public in particular can see those rules, can see coalition agreements, um, it would be heaven if we had some input in the process beyond
Yeah.
just the transparency. But yeah, I would like those as general principles rather than new ways for politicians to play games with each other.
Yeah. But I think from my point of view, kudos to Action SA for putting some proposals on the table. It's interesting stuff. I think it takes the discourse further. Yes, it's not on probably the top issues that matter most to South Africans, but it actually improves governance ultimately, I think, which will lead to the key issues being solved. So let's move from Action. So you mentioned Action SA doing a good job in opposition, Paul, and then the other party that you mentioned is doing a good job in opposition is the EFF.
Yes.
Now, the EFF turned 12, so they're almost a teenager. They turned 12 last week, and they celebrated with a birthday bash in Khayelitsha, which was done, I think, very professionally, very impactfully, in typical EFF fashion. It was a far cry from 2 years ago of Julius Malema on the cherry picker rising up with 100,000 people at FNB Stadium in Soweto. But I think two things. It's a difficult time for the EFF because they had a bad election last year. They have been targeted by MK, both in terms of personnel and electorally. So they've lost a lot of their leadership figures and been a bit embattled. They've not been performing well in by-elections, and MK's eating quite a bit into their votes. They've been wiped out to all intents and purposes in KwaZulu-Natal. And then I thought the Western Cape, Cape Town was a very interesting choice. I think it's the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that they've done a big set piece event in the Western Cape. I can see potentially why they were there, but yeah, it's a difficult context for their 12th birthday.
Yeah, and so when you first mentioned it and you said why Western Cape pros and cons, what did I do? Of course, I pulled up the numbers, Jonathan. And
Mm,
as you said, 12 years old, happy birthday and best wishes to the party. They contested 2014. So, they've got 3 years, they've got 3 elections of national provincial data in the Western Cape. And just on a provincial level, they got about 1.5 or less than 1.5% in 2014. They went up to 2.5% in 2019, and to 4.5%.
mm,
And then they grew a little slower last year. They're sitting at just under 6%. But what happened in the meantime is the PA leapfrogged them into third place behind the DA and the ANC. So what do you do as the EFF? Your traditional growth, your historical growth was in Gauteng and in the northern provinces of Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Northwest. There was some promising growth in KZN in the last 5, 6 years, particularly 2019, 2021. But as you said, that got wiped out by MK last
mm,
year. Not doing well in by-elections. Eastern Cape, maybe not as much of a foothold, although you might think the party did pretty well in Nelson Mandela Bay. Maybe they see the Western Cape as the best opportunity for growth, and particularly, as we've said, in a local government election where there's a fracturing of the vote, where there's a greater possibility of coalition politics, not just in Cape Town or on the West Coast, but in municipalities we haven't thought of until now.
mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, look, I think it was a interesting and unusual choice, but I can see the pathway. The ANC is declining year on year in the Western Cape, and the DA is making some incremental gains into votes from Black South Africans in the city of Cape Town, but not massively. There's a vote up for grabs in terms of specifically places like Khayelitsha, Gugulethu, the Cape Flats, more broadly, and then other parts of, even parts of Drakensberg, parts of Stellenbosch. So be interesting to watch how that unfolds. What I also have detected from the EFF and Julius Malema is also a slight change in tone and style. They've become, and I'm sure a lot of people will jump on me for saying this, but they've become a little more serious, and less of the EFF of old. I wonder if it's maybe too late when they're on a bit of a decline. I don't know. We'll have to obviously see when they go to the polls next year for the municipal elections. But I've always thought in the past that the more moderate and the more sensible, and the more disciplined the EFF become, the more dangerous they are to other parties in being able to win more votes. So it'll be interesting to see if the kind of tone and approach that they seem to have adopted in recent months holds.
Well, we know, Jonathan, that since the election last year, since June, the results came out, huge shock for the EFF. Floyd left, Mbuyiseni Dlozi left, Naledi Kgiro was sidelined,
Mm,
and pushed down to, I think, 180 on the list, and punished for the gazebo incident. But a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of capacity at the very top has left the party or been sidelined. I think it was a manic time for Malema, those 3, 4, 5 months after the election.
mm.
And yeah, I agree with you. I think Malema has realized that this is a time of rebuilding. This is a time of consolidate.
Yeah. Well, interesting to watch. What maybe as a little another promo for another series of pieces that we're writing on Substack. We started at the beginning of the year with a kind of state of the parties. We're going to be over the coming month looking at the state of each of the bigger or more significant parties in South Africa. So we'll be looking in depth at where the EFF is, where the ANC is, where MK is, where the DA is, where the PA is, which is important, the IFP and others as we go forward. Now, before we end, and as I alluded to, it would not be a conversation between Paul and I if I did not ask Paul what on earth is happening in Johannesburg this particular week. And It's been another interesting time. I mean, unfortunately, service delivery continues to be poor, but there's no shortage of drama in the corridors of power, but particularly in the PA in the city of Joburg.
Yes, we said we focus on Action SA and the EFF, Jonathan, but the PA is all over everything, not just in the
Yeah.
by-elections, but all over my beloved Joburg. Yes, so a lot has happened. We talked about why Kenny was in the crook place at the time, but allegedly not with the crooks. He was taking a budding young cub journalist under his wing, but we haven't seen that story published. So many things. Gayton tweeted, Kenny handed in a resignation letter. He's resigned as councillor. And Liam Jacobs, um, recently of the DA, also featured, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago on
Yeah.
the National Dialogue, is now, I guess he's now renting, or they found him a place in Joburg because he will be replacing Kenny. I guess it's not clear at this stage. We're assuming that he will step into the MMC of Transport shoes, a budget where hundreds of millions of rands has been returned to Treasury because under Kenny, those conditional grants weren't spent, the worst spending rate of any of the metros. He's going to have to see if he can meet this deadline on repairing Lillian Ngoyi Street that Kenny committed to. I think he's got a month. So interesting start for someone whose rise to fame and to a political career happened via TikTok, first from the DA, now in the PA. How do I feel about it? I guess I'm just tired of any party, but the PA in particular, messing around Joburg residents. And yeah, I'd like to be taken seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think it's been confirmed yet that Liam Jacobs will be take on the MMC role. He's definitely taken Kenny Kuneni's PR seat, but it remains to be seen who's going to be in the Mako position. Either way, it is bizarre. Liam Jacobs, of course, has been announced as the PA's mayoral candidate for Tshwane, so it is a bit of a strange move to put someone who's going to be the mayoral candidate for Tshwane in a PR councillor seat in Johannesburg. I don't think it bodes well for his campaign for Tshwane or for the PA being seen to be taking Johannesburg and its residents very, very seriously.
You will remember, Jonathan, and firstly, I agree. You'll remember that I think in 2021, Gayton paraded around his 2021 Joburg candidate. I forget the woman's name, or it might have been 2016, I forget. I forget because there've been so many candidates and there've been one or two MPs that have been replaced or swapped out quietly, or who were maybe used in the campaign and didn't find any progress in the party. So we'll see if this is an opportunity or a dead end for Liam Jacobs. But
Yeah,
I can tell you, I think without fear of correction, that I don't think whatever name recognition or brand value he brings is going to boost the PA. I think the party's doing well enough by itself. I don't see his inclusion in the mix in boosting the party in any way.
yeah. Of course, Gayton himself made a play for the mayoralty of the city of Johannesburg a few years back as well.
Well, who
Let's not
hasn't,
forget.
right?
Who hasn't? Yeah, who hasn't made a play for the mayor of Joburg?
Yeah.
Um, on that note, Paul, you long-suffering resident of the city of Johannesburg, thank you very, very much again for another good conversation. Our usual plea and call to action to those that watch and listen and read our pieces on the South Africa Brief on Substack. Please share as far and wide with friends, family, and colleagues as possible. Continue to watch, to like, to subscribe, and thank you very, very much for your support. Until next time, speak soon. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Jonathan.